Today's guest is Jared Simmons. He's a consultant, advisor, and coach for OUTLAST Consulting. Jared, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, innovation is definitely a topic I love, and you've been a part of the innovation world for a long time.
Yeah, yes, a very long time. Yes.
Were you very curious as a child?
I, I think yes, I was. My one of my earliest childhood memories was is cleaning pennies. So my dad used to let me count his pennies, and so when I counted them, his change when he come home from work, some of them were dirty, and so I decided, oh, I need to clean them. And so I went into the kitchen and found the things that I thought might eat things off of pennies, like hot sauce and mustard. For some reason, these things just to me seemed like things that would take something off of a penny. And so I I took 5 or 6 pennies and I had 5 or 6 little cups, and I put in the first cup I put a little hot sauce and a lot of mustard and a little bit and like the different combinations, and I sat them out on my dresser uh, in my bedroom for days and checked them every day to see which penny was the cleanest. And needless to say, my mother was horrified by discovering old hot sauce and mustard in cups on my dresser. But yeah, that's just been part of who I am. Wanting to understand how to do things, experiment with them, and try to make them better.
Yeah. So your sort of degree in chemical engineering came out of
Yeah,
that?
yeah, exactly. A decade before I ever showed up for that on campus, I was already experimenting with chemicals.
See, so when I think of chemicals and experimenting, I'm thinking, you know, have you ever, was one of these experiments ever gone bad on you?
Oh goodness, yeah. I think bad for me is not for me, experimenting, there's never a bad outcome. It either works the way you thought it did, or you learn something new. So there's definitely been a lot of situations where I've learned something new quickly and loudly, or in a messy way. So yeah, lots of wrong turns with different things around the house, but nothing permanent. I'd say so. That's good.
Got it. Talk to me about Procter and Gamble. Why P&G?
Yeah, it was a very strange situation. So I was wrapping up my chemical engineering degree at Alabama, and the head of the department came to me and said, "Hey, Procter and Gamble's coming to campus to interview. I'd like for you to interview with him." And I said, I don't. What's Procter and Gamble?" And he said, "Oh, they make Tide, and Pampers, and other things." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, where are they located?" He said, "Cincinnati." And I said, I'm not I'm not moving to Ohio, like, it's cold up there. But he asked me as a favor to him to do the interview, and I did. And, just really enjoyed meeting the folks that came down, and continued through the process and ended up there. But there were a lot of twists and turns, in my getting to Procter& and Gamble, um, in that process of just so many different places where it could have never happened. So it was just
What were
crazy.
some of those, I guess at this point, good coincidences that guided you along that path?
Yeah. So the department head is essentially insisting I do the interview. There was an issue with my travel arrangements for the on-site interview, and it got canceled. And they rescheduled it like 3 days before Christmas. There were 5 people on the campus where I interviewed, and they were all there to interview me, basically. That happened. I accepted the job, and then right after I accepted it, they P&G entered into an exploratory conversation with some companies on forming a joint venture and spinning off the business unit that I that I signed with. So they were like, "Well, you kind of have a job, but we don't know if it's with P&G or with this new company or if they're going to create a third company. So, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, if I were your son, what would you tell me to do?" And she said, "Well, I'd put your resume out to other business units." So I had a job, but then my resume went out to other business units, and that's how I ended up in baby care. Um,
Oh,
but
okay.
uh,
What
but
what did
yeah,
you learn in baby care?
baby care. I learned a lot in baby care. I spent my entire P&G career there, and started in material development. So I was responsible for making sure the materials that the some of the materials that the diaper is made of were made correctly at various plants around the world. Uh, and then I moved into a market research position. So for 4 or 5 years, I interviewed moms about babies and their experience in diapering and wiping and all these things. So I'll spare your listeners a lot of the things that I learned, but I did learn a lot about. One thing I learned about innovation from those moms is that it's it's helpful to humility is helpful. So um, I often got a lot in those interviews of richer information from moms because they thought I didn't know anything. Like I was 27, 28-year-old guy with no kids. And so they were literally explaining like how you open a diaper, how you like all these little things that were super useful to us from a product development standpoint, but she might not have gone to the trouble of explaining to someone who she assumed had kids and understood how diapers worked. Um, so humility, allowing people to assume that you don't know, that really allows you to get to a different level of insights with people.
Yeah. How do you set yourself up for success? I mean, obviously the attitude and how you speak can dictate it, but how do you set the right environment so that you're not coming in looking like an expert?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really less about me not looking like an expert and more of how do you set the other person up to feel like the expert in the room. So that's what I try to focus on is wherever I am, I want to acknowledge the fact that this consumer or this expert or this other person has expertise in an area, and I want to honor that and acknowledge it and give them the space to kind of step into that and own it. And as a whether it's a innovation consulting or executive coaching or any of the things I do, podcast hosting, that's the mindset I have is I want to showcase the expertise of the person that I'm talking to.
Yeah. And I guess if you're building a business, I guess that's the same attitude with, learning about the market, learning about the customer is, setting them up to be the expert.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And um it's hard, especially when you're an entrepreneur, and you feel like you need to be the expert in the room to win the business. It's hard to put that it's hard to kind of put that to the side and let the other person shine because I think for me anyway, when I was starting out, my natural tendency was I need to prove to this person that I know a lot about this subject so that they will want to work with me when it's really the opposite. People want to feel like you understand them and you value them and understand their business. And that's what makes them want to do business with you.
Got it. Makes sense. Talk to me about um, some of the key things you learned. I mean, I think we talked briefly about open innovation, but love to
Mhm.
learn things like that at P&G you thought really stood out.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think the concept of open innovation was just coming into its own at P&G when I started, and that's really this shift from uh, patent and ownable knowledge and expertise to partnerships and shareable knowledge and expertise as sort of the engine for your innovation process. Uh, the that had a lot of knock-on effects on careers. A research and development career, looks different if you're trying to base it on getting as many patents as you can versus enabling as many new innovations as you can. Those lead to different outcomes. It also changes the way you think about organizational structure, pace of innovation. The expectations change. The expectation is you should be able to do newer things faster. If you're taking an open innovation approach versus having to invent every molecule that you're going to base your new product on. And the other thing I think that I learned at P&G was the importance of cross-functional communication. And people talk about silos now and all those things in terms of, this group doesn't talk to that group, this group, doesn't talk to that group. But it's really more about having shared metrics and understanding what people mean when they say things. So it's not, there's a lot of focus on people putting everybody in the room together, breaking down the silos, but but if you're not speaking the same language in that room, you might as well not be uh, become talking. And um, it can sometimes be even more. Um, it can sometimes be even more problematic for innovation to have people in the room and have the illusion of communication and the illusion of cooperation and collaboration because you think it's happening, you think it's working, and then versus the old days when people knew, oh well, these groups aren't talking to each other. So that I think is a big learning, and for me from my P&G days is it's not enough to just have everyone in the room. They have to be speaking the same language and shooting for the same goals.
Got it. Makes sense. So that was P&G. I mean, he went to McKinsey.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
all the ones. I mean, when I think of that firm, I think of for me personally, I think of I think there's a lot of work done on change management through
Mhm.
that firm. But I mean, what was your experience there?
Yeah, I came into the firm through a non-traditional path. Most associates come into McKinsey from a major business school after getting an MBA and things like that. I worked at P&G for 10 years. I didn't have an advanced degree, and so I came in a different track. And so what it was for me was basically I worked there for 3 years, and it was basically my MBA. So I learned a lot about the business world, the broader business world. I learned, how all the different elements of a company come together strategically and operationally. And I'm very grateful for that experience and that education in that regard. Probably about a year in, I started to work more in the operations and innovation space as an expert in working on in the innovation and product development organization. And in that role, I had an opportunity to see how a lot of different companies try to organize themselves to innovate and what their expectations are around that, which was which is also educational.
I mean, what sort of things or configurations you thought were effective or at least interesting?
Yeah. So there's always this big debate around centralized versus distributed. So should we bring all our innovators together and have them working, in this group, and then they send out, oh, here are all the innovations to all these other folks who then go, put them into the market. Or should we have everybody out in their individual businesses doing innovative things and separately? And so there was always that one of those models in the big companies kind of at play. And what I noticed was that the life cycle of of an idea or an insight or an invention kind of determined what made sense for that innovation process. So
Mm.
if you think about pharmaceuticals, you know, a decade, 2 decades, that's a typical, those are development cycles. You think about the construction industry, like we work on these long cycles. Whereas in fast moving consumer goods, you need something new on the shelf every 6 months, a year, 18 months. These are, you're doing something, either changing the label, or you're putting a whole new product on the shelf, or you're changing the positioning, or you're trying to win a new placement in the shelves, different shelf set. So all of that, when you start to work back from that cycle time, it really affects, okay, how can I organize myself around these things? And that's been interesting to me for a long time, but it's been something that I think things like AI and, these large language models and large learning LLMs and all these other things are disrupting. Is innovation, as you said, is basically change management. And these things are disrupting our approach to managing change. And so we have to innovate. A.G. Lafley used to say, we have to innovate how we innovate.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on right now, is we're figuring out not just what is AI, but how do we manage change in this new world?
So just trying to read between the lines and try to connect some dots. Would it, not to say there's a hard rule on this, but would, let's say, hey, its development time is shorter, and let's say there are more incremental innovations or improvements, distributed might be better, quicker maybe.
Mhm.
But if you're grinding something for 10 20 years, maybe central might be a little bit better, on stuff like that. I mean, are there sort of the loose connections that you were kind of exploring?
I think so. Yeah, I left McKinsey a little over 10 years ago, um, and and so the world is very different now than it was then, and I've been in the innovation space since then, on my own and with Coca Cola, but um, but I think that was true 10 plus years ago. So so I guess what I'm teeing up is, we're now in the in a window of time, in an era where we've got to figure out what is true today, and a lot of big companies are tripping over those old mindsets and old models, and the ones that aren't willing to take that full step back and say, okay, this is how this worked when it took this long to create a standard operating procedure. Well, now it takes 20 minutes to create a standard operating procedure. So what does that mean for how we're organized? What does that mean for the number of people we need? What does that mean for where these people should sit? What does it mean for what kind of education they should have? All those questions that's what innovation is now. It's not how fast, how cheap, it's we have to look at how we innovate now.
Where's the talent?
Yes.
I have, I was talking to a company that has thousands of employees, and they just can't find the people locally. So they have 700 people in an area that has the talent there. It just happens to be in an area.
Right. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, no, that's what you have to be willing to let go of, and you have to. I think right now a lot of companies are defining themselves by how they work, and not what benefits they're trying to deliver to the consumer or to shareholders. And you have to let go. Everybody's just gonna have to let go of how. We're just gonna have to radically accept that how we did things in 2018
Yeah.
is gone. And we just have to go back and ask ourselves, okay, now, knowing what we know, having the tools at our disposal, knowing where the talent is, as you said, how should we go about solving these problems?
Sure. Looking at your Coca-Cola experience, How do they operate? What made them the company they are?
Yeah, Coca-Cola is a great company. I think a lot of what what makes them what they are, and the reason they've been around. The easy answer is they are extremely resistant to change, and that sounds bad, especially based on just what I just said 2 minutes ago. But what makes them great is that if something is if something isn't broken, they don't fix it. Formulations stay the same for decades, generations. Things that are working stay the same as it is consumer facing. Um, and so I think that's what makes Coca-Cola um, has given it its longevity, its staying power, its place in the world. I mean, with the logo has been the logo for how long? So that's what makes Coca-Cola competitive and strong as an organization. And I think that our strengths are our strengths, our weaknesses are our strengths misapplied. And so I think sometimes Coca-Cola's challenge is applying that strength in the wrong places, and that's what I've seen, for better and for worse, during my time at Coke.
Yeah. So you take all this experience and you have your own innovation practice. You're involved in some other things. What does that look like?
Yeah. So after that corporate career, I decided to go out on my own. I wanted to take the best of what I had learned from each place, and add in the things that I wished those places were were better at. And so we try to bring the uh, value focused approach, from that I learned from P&G, from McKinsey, from Coca Cola, to our clients of all sizes. Um, and we bring that focus with what we talk about as kindness, empathy, and joy. And so it's important to us that we meet people where they are, at all levels of the organization, and understand their view of the world from whatever level they're sitting, and invest the time and attention into helping them solve their problems from their side of the table. And we're small and focused, so we can do those things with our clients.
Okay. Well, you're talking about empathy, joy, and give me a practical example. Here's a challenge. Here's an intervention. Here's a result.
Sure, sure. So, so we've worked with a couple of mid-sized industrial firms, and what the themes that have started to show up in those kind of environments um, are leaders. The strengths of leaders propel the organization, and the blind spots of leaders hold them back. And so it's not that the leaders aren't capable; it's that what has gotten them there, has created a blind spot that is now propagating through the rest of the organization. And when you're not a 100,000 employee company, you know, blind spots of two or three leaders really have a very strong cascading effect. And so, a, s- a lot of companies or firms would come in and institute a new work process or a new business model, or reorganize or restructure or hire or push people out, or what have you. What we tend to do is lead with a coaching model and come alongside the leader to help them define their goals, understand how that affects the business and the organization, and then work with them in a uh, thought partnership sort of way to help them make the changes they need to make and see the world a bit differently, which then they already have the capability to operationalize it. And so it's really just kind of like showing them what's in their blind spot, and then they can go operationalize it. So what we've seen is consulting engagement level impact of turning businesses, you know from losing money to profitable,
Sure.
um, with a coaching engagement versus a consulting engagement.
Sure, of course. What are these blind spots you've come across with these mid-sized industrial companies? What are those, simple terms, what are these blind
Sure.
spots?
It's usually an over reliance on operations, near term, the near term operational objectives. So
Mm,
trying to fix what's right in front of you. This line is down right now. This product isn't shipping this week the way I want it to, and helping them kind of step back from that and understand, okay, well, if I make this type of investment now, we won't have these types of problems 6, 12, 18 months from now. There's a band-aid fix, and then there's the solve it once sort of fix, and the solve it once fix looks outsized, like an outsized expense relative to the problem. But when you compare it to 5 years of that problem, it's not an outsized, expense. So it's just helping them, helping business leaders uh, understand the time horizons that affect enterprises. To go from a $20 million business to a $40 million business, you have to go from firefighting to making more strategic operational investments. Does that answer your question?
absolutely. You mentioned construction as an example as one of these like longer timeline things, possibly. Maybe it's shortened quite a bit. Um,
Hmm.
any insight towards that industry or those sort of processes, or even just talk about, industries that are a little bit more change resistance? What sort of tips do you have in and around that?
Yeah. So I had an opportunity to work in the construction industry with my area of expertise called, which is a process called design to value, where you look at from a stakeholder point of view, what about your product drives value, and you spend money on those things, and the things that don't drive value, you don't spend money on those things. It's very straightforward, um, but it requires understanding what features create value. And if you look at, say, a hotel room, um, fictionalizing the project that I worked on, but if you look at, say, a hotel room, maybe it has 6 light fixtures in it. Um, what is the purpose of each of those 6 light fixtures? What wattage do they need to be able to support? What angles, how can you make them cover more of the room? Can you get by with 5? If you add a 7th, will that make people more likely to stay in the hotel? Will that make them more likely to stay longer? Will that make them more likely to come back? And you check all these things, back to kind of making sure that it's all tied back to something revenue creating or value creating. So the tips I would have for those types of industries is usually, then if you look at one hotel room, that's not how you buy things, right? You buy things by the building, like, okay, well, I'm going to buy all 5,000 light fixtures at once. So finding ways to extrapolate, and this was basically the backbone of what we were working on, is how do you extrapolate the value experienced on an individual basis to the bulk purchasing model. And that is that's the secret, because once you figure out how to do that and engage your suppliers in that process, that's where the value really comes. So we worked with um, GCs and their suppliers, to say, okay, well, if we went from 5,000 to 4,000 lights, what's the value created in that? If we went from 5,000 to 3,000, is that twice as much value created, or is that 10% more?
Yeah.
So just understanding how that propagates out to the purchasing process.
Sure. And then just researching and finding anything and everything possible to sort of, figure out what sort of things could be justified on the front end of creating that value and measuring others.
Exactly, exactly, and leaving no stone unturned. The bed sheets, the faucet, the the fixtures. It's a very tedious process, but there's money when I walk into a hotel room, sometimes my brain starts, oh, well, you don't need three of those. You could have gotten by with two of those. Or if that outlet were here instead of there, you probably could double them up between rooms. So yeah, it's just really about all the little small things that add up to real money over time.
Very cool. I see on your profile represent Cincy. What's that?
That was that is a f- a an effort in Cincinnati, Ohio, that I was part of, to help uh, a historically Black neighborhood increase the number of Black-owned businesses in its storefronts. So, trying to close the gap between the residential profile and the the storefront profile. Yeah, and so yeah, so that was a great thing to help kind of get off the ground and get structured and all those things. Yeah, it was a great experience.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything else related to your experience or, things that you sort of talk to clients about that, that I haven't asked you about?
I think the only other thing is, one thing we've done in addition to the product based and strategy based innovation work is we've now added um, diversity to our innovation portfolio. And so we have a practice around innovation as it relates to diversity. And the tagline for it is reimagining diversity at work. The program's called Kiwavi, and we've got a physical space for the first time in the history of our company. We um, have a building in Cincinnati, Ohio, that we're going to use as an innovation hub to help companies, help clients uh, clarify what their intent is around their diversity efforts and think about whether or not the current processes and approaches they're taking are helping them move efficiently in that direction. And so we're going to have a program around building community. We'll have a program around professional development for people of color, and we'll have a program around entrepreneurship, specifically with the lens of being becoming part of a Fortune 1000 value chain. So how do you move as an entrepreneur in a direction that lets you plug into that value chain?
Very cool. And the idea around the physical space,
Mm.
because a lot of this stuff you see online. What was your vision there?
So I think there are certain types of problems that um, require proximity. And I think when you're talking about building community amongst human beings, whether people of color or not, there's something different about gathering at a space or gathering in a place, and it allows us to bring different things to life. So where everything on our main floor takes full advantage of physical space. So there's a space with paint. Modeling clay, Lego, things like that for people to engage with. There's a space with professional grade musical instruments, piano, keyboards, guitars, bass guitars, things like that for people to engage with. There's a full kitchen. So if you think about having an event on our second floor, each room is capable of an 8-person breakout. You can have the main plenary space and do your things, and then on the breaks, people can go do the things they're passionate about and collect and gather around those things. They don't have to collect and gather around the problems that they experience in the workplace. They can collect and gather, like the musicians can get together and have an experience. The people who love art, the people who love baking or food, and it allows us to kind of reconnect people of color with their humanity, whereas in a corporate setting, it's very easy for uh, people of color and other minoritized groups to get reduced to to the lowest common denominator of their race or gender or other minoritized demographic. So we're trying to reconnect people to what makes them human.